everyone. Thanks for being here tonight on a snowy night. And this is an opportunity for folks to get a first presentation. We typically do this for town meeting. However, with early voting, we try to get out early and get you the information that you need to make informed votes if early voting is something that you want to do. So this really also is an opportunity for the board to practice be present. So thank you for being here. Quickly, this is our timeline of planning and presenting the budget, and as you can see, we're down in February already. The year has just flown by, and we're preparing for our annual meeting, the vote, and voting our budget and bond. And just a little bit of information. This information was shared in a presentation earlier this fall, but it is our enrollment data and our just a couple of notable things. So this is our total enrollment, and then we break it down by groups, and our free and reduced is about 43.5%, which is up about 13% from previous years. So it is something that has increased. Our number of students who are on individual education plans is slightly higher than the state average. State average is around 18%. This is some notable numbers. Class size information, we continue to be within the average range of class size, so that's good news in terms of staff to student ratios. Our class size policy sets a minimum, an optimum, and a maximum, and what we have shared over there is what our current average is for our different grade clusters. High school's a little bit more complicated to just do a class size average, because there's all kinds of electives and different kinds of programmings and the band, and but our current averages are still pretty healthy, in between the minimum and optimum range. So graduation rates. This is actually a source. This source here is from the Agency of Education student profile, so their state data, and you can see that our average graduation rates are in most areas are at or slightly higher than the state average, and I think that's attributed to a real strong focus in ensuring that all students succeed within our schools, and also not being too large of a high school. I think we're at sort of that nice range of number of students and being able to really individually take care of them and getting their needs met. Our employees, I've shared the 3-year data, and we've made some reductions along the way, and trying to keep ourselves right-sized with both the community's needs around budgeting and tax increases, and also with trying to stay right-sized with our declining enrollment so that it stays balanced. So we have made a significant decrease overall in the last 2 years. And then our goals, these, are you taking them? Sure? Okay. So these are our goals that are reflective in our continuous improvement plan, which is a required plan for every district to write at the state level, and that's to close our state identified equity gap, to increase the proficiency of underperforming students in ELA, math, and science, have all students reading at grade level by grade 3, and to increase access and engagement to learning for students with social, emotional, and mental health needs. So those are sort of the broad goals that are much more detailed in how we're going to do that and by what rates and whatnot in our continuous improvement plan. And then the board believes that they can help us achieve these goals by maintaining educational programming, and we have kept a level service budget, so this budget that the proposed budget that the board has approved is the same level of services as this year for next year. And also to ensure that those services include access to robust universal education. We do that through additional coaching and training of our teachers, intervention models, specialized services for identified students, transportation, and facility maintenance. So we're maintaining all those services. And now it's good.
We're just clicking. Yeah, I clicked on the no arrows. Okay. Too easy. Okay, so we'll jump right into the excuse me, budget overview. If you go left, it'll work. That was not paying attention. So just real quick in the budget over here. So on this particular slide, what we're looking at are just some things that that impact the budget, and really what we're looking at kind of ranges from an increase to social and emotional needs of students, an increase in healthcare premiums, facilities repairs, and other factors include a decrease in the availability of student services, as well as the special ed, a decrease in the special ed block grant. So again, this is just to depict some of the factors that are impacting the budget, but this list is not all inclusive. So on this slide, what we have here is just expenditures by function. We've got our pie chart here. Really what I'd like to bring your attention to are the three areas that essentially account for just over 70% of our budgetary expenditures, which is direct instruction, support services, and special ed. So I guess of note on this particular slide, our special ed represents a 10% increase over the previous year.
We might want to include that the debt services includes that first column.
Yeah, that's on another slide. Rock and roll. Nope, no worries. I lied, Matt. You only looked once. Okay. All right, so what we're looking at here, again, so this is another pie chart that represents the revenues that we receive with, and you know, most of us know, with the biggest portion of this pie coming from the state ed fund, which is represented by 85.3%. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. What we're looking at here is a comparison of last year to this year. So your first line item there, essentially that is the proposed budget by the board at $39,291,625. As we move down, what we're looking at are just total revenues. So those are funds we're going to receive from state, local, and federal sources. So think of maybe grants. As we move into the third line, that essentially is the money that we're requesting from the state. That is the education spending. This year we're requesting from the state $33,266,933.
How do we make it roll again?
So, the education spending essentially are the funds that we're going to request from the state. That's represented in the amount of $33,266,933. The next number that I just want to bring your attention to is the LTWADM, which stands for the Long-Term Weighted Average Daily Membership. As we look at that comparison of last year to this year, it's an increase of 3.45%. Now that number, the daily membership, if you recall from a previous slide that Amy presented, our actual student count is somewhere around 1485, something to that effect. Here, looking at it, it would suggest that we have 2,300 students in the building last year, and this year we have just under 100 more coming in at 2,417. So what's important to realize about the LTWADM is it is a formula used by the state that takes in, it's a weighted formula utilized by the state in order to determine education spending and allocation. So we did not increase in our student size or the number of bodies in our building, and we do not have 2,400 students in our building. Again, it's just a number that, that was created by a formula that was drafted by the state. The other thing that we need to take into consideration is this weighted formula is a different formula than was used last year. So we're not necessarily comparing apples to apples if we're looking at the formula, so on and so forth. As we move into the next line, as far as education spending per pupil, we get that number by dividing the education spending. Again, that's the number that we're going to, that's the amount that we're going to request from the state. We divide that by the LTWADM, which in this case is 2,417, which is the result of a new formula that was put together by the state. And that's how we come to 13,761 for education spending per pupil for FY26. As I mentioned before, we're utilizing a different formula than we did last year. So we see this increase of 3.27%. But again, we're utilizing a different formula. So I'm not saying it's not an increase, because clearly it is by the numbers. However, it may not be an apples to apples comparison. So we'll want to keep that in mind. This number, 13,761, which is represented by a 3.27% increase over the previous year, we will see this number again. So just please keep that in mind, and keep in mind what I just said about those numbers. Lastly, we're going to move into the common level of appraisal, which is also known as the CLA. That has increased by 27.18%. Essentially, what this number means, 122%, it means that you are being taxed. For example, you are being taxed on a property that was appraised at $122,000. If you were to sell your house in the current market, it would only be worth $100,000. So essentially, based on what your home would sell for in the market today, you are paying taxes on a property that is greater than what it's actually worth on the market today. That is what that number represents. If you want more information on that number, feel free to go to the state website and do some research. Okay, so here we're looking at the essentially your tax expenditure over the last 3 years based on the value of your home, which is homestead. So I'll bring your attention to the assessed property value of $300,000. In 2024, you paid $35.87 in taxes for that year. In FY25, that number increased to $39.84. The budget that we're proposing is actually going to reduce your tax obligation to $37.58, which is a $225 decrease over the previous year. As you come down to the bottom of the slide, you'll also notice that we incorporated what the tax rate was for those previous 3 years. So in 24, it was 1.1956. 25, it was 1.3280, which again, we see that increase because we see the increase above as we're paying more taxes. The proposed budget brings the tax rate down to 1.2528, which is a 7-cent, well, just over 7-cent decrease in the previous tax rate, which is represented by essentially a 5.66% decrease. This chart just represents the income sensitivity. So this is just going to give those individuals who participate in this program, give them an idea of what their tax impact will be, or that essentially that decrease in the tax impact. Income sensitivity, you're paying taxes based on household income as opposed to the actual value of your property. So now we'll transition into the fund balance. So essentially, the fund balance breaks down into a 3-year cycle. We receive funds, we audit funds, we we hold the funds, and then we vote on allocation of the funds. The current balance available for allocation this year is $978,029. In addition to the general fund, we have the capital reserve fund and the educational reserve fund. So the capital reserve fund essentially is for things like facility maintenance and repair, unexpected equipment failure, and other items and services that may require or may be required in order to keep the facilities operational. What you are going to see on the ballot is going to be Article 2 in regard to the reserve fund. Now, I just mentioned the allocation of audited funds from 3 years ago, the $978,000 plus dollars. What you are going to see on the ballot is a proposal by the board to move $582,725 of those dollars into the capital reserve fund to address some of the items that you see, within this category, right? Bathroom upgrades, stormwater, school furniture, so on and so forth. So we're looking at moving some of those funds, some of the funds that we have in the excess funds that we received from 3 years ago, to move them into that capital reserve fund. So as I mentioned before, we also have an education reserve fund. So this fund is used for unanticipated needs as they relate to educational programming. Again, we have that fund balance from 3 years ago. The board is proposing that we move $150,000 of those dollars into the education reserve fund. At the bottom in the gray, what you will see is the actual ballot language on the ballot. And again, Article 2, we're requesting to move $582,725 into the capital reserve fund. Article 3, we're requesting that we move $150,000 into the education reserve fund. Of note, moving these funds does not impact the tax rate. These are excess funds that we have from 3 years ago. We're just going to reallocate them to these different funds so that we can utilize those funds in a different way. The newly revised education funding formula as it is applied. So this is Article 1 on the ballot. This is what you are going to see on your ballot. 3 numbers that I want to bring your attention to. The first one is $39,291,625. That is the amount of the proposed budget. That is what we are requesting our budget to be. The next number is the $13,761. We discussed that in the previous slide, as that is the education spending per pupil as determined by the new funding formula utilizing the LTW-ADM, which also represents a 3.2% increase over the previous year utilizing a different formula. So I don't want anyone to be afraid of this language that we see here. I don't want anybody to be afraid of the language or not necessarily understand these numbers. That number, again, was created utilizing the new formula for the ADM, the LTW-ADM, to come up with the per pupil spending. Now, that 3.27% does not represent an increase to the budget or the tax. It is just a rate as compared to last year's rate, which used a different formula. Okay? The budget that we are proposing decreases your tax rate by just over 7 cents or 5.66%. That's what we're looking at as far as a reduction in our tax rate. Bond. Okay, so in addition to the proposed budget, and in addition to the reallocation of the funds, our audited funds, we're also proposing an $8 million capital project bond. Okay, so for transparency and for situational awareness, the first payment of that bond is already incorporated into our proposed budget, which represents just over a 7% decrease in the tax rate over the previous year, which is also a reduction by 5.66% over the previous year. So that bond vote has already been taken into consideration. We wanted to make sure that the community understood what that budget would look like with that bond, with that expenditure already incorporated into the budget. So the capital project bond is going to address just really our aging infrastructure as well as prioritize health and safety upgrades over at the Herrick building. And if you didn't catch it the first time, our budget represents a 5.6% decrease over the previous year. Again, taking into consideration that first payment of the bond vote. So now as we look at some of the key components of that capital project bond, really we're going to be looking at addressing the roof, exterior doors, electrical systems, and library infrastructure upgrades. All of those items being over at the Herrick building. So as when we held this forum previously, a community member had mentioned how it would be nice to kind of show where some of those funds were going. So just to bring your attention to the top three categories, we're looking at the roof, the windows, and the library is going to consume the majority of that capital bond, the capital bond that we're requesting. Those will be the priority. Now we'll move on to the ballot language. As I mentioned before, that first bond payment is already incorporated into our proposed budget and is not going to impact your tax rate because with the budget we're presenting, we're looking at a decrease of 5.66% in the tax rate over the previous year. Here we have the bond language, which is going to be Article 4. The Milton Town School Board proposes to incur bonded indebtedness for the purpose of facility repair and replacement to include Herrick roof and window replacement, electrical code compliance, and library ventilation at the estimated total project cost of $8 million. The school construction aid program is currently under suspension by the Vermont State Legislature. Therefore, the 100% of the project shall be built at the school district's cost without state participation. State funds may not be available at the time this project is otherwise eligible to receive state school construction aid. The district is responsible for all costs incurred in connection with any borrowing done in anticipation of the state school construction aid. Shall bonds of the Milton Town School District in an amount not to exceed $8 million, bearing interest not to exceed 5%, be issued for the purpose of facility repair and replacement to include Herrick roof and window replacement, electrical code compliance, and library ventilation. Again, this is the language that you are going to see on Article 4. This is our proposal for the capital project bond. That concludes the presentation. Are there any questions?
Yeah, I'm going for it.
There's also a couple of videos that we made that I can play for you. You just have to.
In the meantime, we'll take a question.
Yeah, the overage that you guys kind of baked into the bond, say that's not used, how is that going to be? It's $500,000, I think, you put in for an overage.
Oh, you're talking
Yeah,
about
if
the
it's not used, what happens to it? Is
So
it
what'll,
going to general fund, is it?
No, we will use it to address some of the other items that were on. So if you add up those three categories, they're close to 8.
Mm-hmm.
And then you see some of the other items that we would be looking to work on.
Yep.
The funds would then be used to address any other thing that we felt posed a security issue, health issue, anything that was critical, especially as we look at the report that we had received previously. Mm-hmm. And when we had discussed the bond in a previous meeting, there were items on there that we said, you know, we would like to address.
Yep.
However, our priority is going to be the roof, the library, and the electrical. So
Gotcha.
that is how we would use those funds.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yep.
But they do go into the capital reserve fund, so they would live there.
Yes.
Yep.
Until they're allocated to that.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Let me just,
Any questions? Okay. Is there anyone online that has a question?
let me get back into, meeting.
And there are lots of things that say that.
Yeah, they can just dump me out of the meeting, hang on 1 second. I'm gonna have to, jump. Yeah, I gotta jump back into the meeting.
It is a little percent.
Yeah, hold on. I just got to open my calendar a second here. There we go. Okay. Share. Events. Okay, welcome to my giant face, everybody. Welcome.
For the FY26 budget, we're estimating a 5.66% decrease in the tax rate. Here are the details. We have a level service budget. Even still, due to increases in healthcare premiums, salaries, facility repairs, and specialized services, our expenses are up 7.89%. On the other side, our revenues are increasing by 14.12%. This offsets the tax impact of the increased expenditures. The number you see on the ballot is our education spending per pupil. This is up 3.27% over last year. Even though the per pupil spending is up by 3.27%, the estimated tax rate is still decreasing by 7.52 cents, which is a 5.66% decrease. As for the bond, our FY26 budget already accounts for that expense. The 5.66% decrease in the estimated tax rate includes the bond payment for the FY26 budget. Education funding is complicated. When voting, it is important to remember that although per pupil spending is up by 3.27%, education taxes are estimated to go down by 5.66%.
And then there is a video for the bond as well. That's, yep. Here's the bond video.
Hi, my name is Kylie Flowers, and I am the principal at Milton Elementary School. This is my 22nd year in the district, and the proposed bond will help fund many important safety updates for our building. Safety is important to me here at Milton Elementary School. Many of our exterior doors are not closing properly throughout the building. While we have been addressing these issues through repairs, the bond will allow us to replace the doors to ensure the safety of our students and staff. The improvements will also support the creation of a multimedia learning space in our library. These upgrades will allow our students to have a more functional, comfortable, and efficient space for all of their learning needs.
In the fall, we had a delayed opening of the elementary school due to mold growth. Last summer, Vermont set a record for oppressive humidity, which was 10% higher than any summer on record. Last summer was one of the hottest summers ever, too. High humidity and heat result in mold growth, slippery floors, and condensation on windows. In order to contend with all these issues, we need to upgrade our infrastructure. Additionally, we must also address electrical code issues as we continue adding HVAC to tackle heat and moisture problems. The library used by both the elementary and the middle school has a faulty ventilation system with no air conditioning. The library also has very poor acoustics and no longer meets the educational needs for library media programming. Many exterior doors don't close properly, leading to an energy efficiency issue and, more pressing, a safety issue. The cost to replace these big ticket items far exceeds both our regular maintenance budget and capital reserve fund, so So we're asking voters to approve an $8 million bond on March 4th.
Okay, if you're online, you have a question, stick your hand up.